Good afternoon. Last two sessions of, I have to say, the first AIM conference in 10 years, and wow, that's been a cool few days, hasn't it? Even I have to say, being then one of the last speakers, knowing about all the other great speakers that have been there before me, it makes me a bit nervous. But I know, of course, that John will be the closing final act after this, not in 5 minutes, but in half an hour or something like that. I've been asked to summarize some of the trends here, and for those that don't know me, I'm Atle Schekland. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of AIM, title changes, and it's a privilege actually being here, and a privilege having you here for these last sessions. By the way, are you okay with my accent? Do you understand me there in back? Do you hear me? Okay. I don't think translation services will be available. If there's difficult things, tweet it and we'll respond later. And if people don't know me, I'm 75% Norwegian, 25% Swedish. My wife is Indonesian with Portuguese genes. Our daughter, she was born in the UK. She got the Dutch nationality, and since 2005, we lived here in the US. So I'm the international part of AIM. And the picture here is basically talk about trends and what are the 8 things you should tell your boss on Monday. What are the things we learned here moving forward? And I know there's a lot of things that have been said, but I try to summarize some of the more important things. And some of these trends can actually consume you if you're not careful, like this picture shows. This is my daughter, 7 years old, in front of her pet Bruce. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually a picture from Schiphol Airport. It's an SAP commercial. Discovery Channel runs SAP. So, but keep this in mind when we start on this. People that know me, see which buttons we press here. I'm guessing this one. Know me that I like statistics, but you also know by all the statistics you heard the last few days, you can find statistics to support whatever you want these days, can't you? So this is my disclaimer. If you've seen it before, that's fine. I just want to ensure we're all on the same page. Because numbers, you have to be careful you don't jump to conclusions. So when we look at how to avoid heart attack, we found that the Japanese eat very little fat and they suffer fewer heart attacks than the British Americans. We found the French eat a lot of fat and also suffer fewer heart attacks than the British Americans. We found the Japanese drink very little red wine and suffer fewer heart attacks than the British and Americans, while the Italians, like the Norwegians, drinks excessive amounts of red wine and also suffer fewer heart attacks than the British and Americans. So based on this research, our conclusion is eat and drink whatever you like. It's speaking English that kills you. So keep this in mind, not only what we heard the last few days, but what we're covering now in the next 25 minutes or so, that this statistic says, what can it mean? What can it mean for you? Don't jump to conclusion based on it, but you know this. So the 8 trends, let's start by number 1, empower staff and customers. If you read the report we published by Geoffrey Moore a couple of years ago, we were talking about that many organizations almost put enterprise IT on hold in 2000. We were asking tough questions like, what's the ROI? What's the payback? What are we getting back from that investment? While on the consumer side, it just went through the roof. And Forrester, where Ted works, one of the opening keynotes, he said, I think they came up with the conclusion that in their research that more than 50% now of US employees feel they have better technology at home than they have in the office. I find that sad, because their IT budget is a lot less than what we spend inside our organizations. So when you look at it, when you actually also ask employees, that around 35% of them say that the technology they now have in the office, they actually already learned how to use as consumers. And perhaps an example here. In January, we gave iPads to all staff, basically to help to innovate, come up with new ideas, help staff think about things differently, just to help us move forward and have them rethink a little bit how we look at IT. Some staff, I have to admit, asked in the first day, excuse me, is IT department going to set up a training class or so here of how to use the iPad? Some people asked. So I went home that night. I remember telling my daughter, saying, what some staff I asked for, and asked her, do you mind recording a small training video? And she said, sure, Daddy. So she went up to her room later that evening on her Mac, recorded a training video that I then published on Yammer again to staff that wanted training on this stuff. perhaps not a good example, but the point is, you have to, how to say, empower your staff to then help other staff to support this, not necessarily using daughters, but other colleagues in the process. And John, when his presentation, what happens here? I pressed the wrong button. Talked about this, the history of enterprise IT in one slide. We talked about how things are changing with system of engagement, system of record. And I have to say, though, that think of system of record, system of engagement, not as two different things, but think of almost like inside each other. The first circle might be system of record, how you have control of things, what you know what you did for important stuff, and system of engagement as a layer on top of that. But if you look at trends, and perhaps some lessons learned in the last few days, is that the 90s and the last decade actually was all about connecting devices, and that's going to take off even more. But now it's a lot more about connecting people. It could be staff, it could be customers. And keep that in mind when we move forward. Forrester also look at an empowered era, about engagement stuff here. How we move from the old way to the new way of thinking about this. But some of the discussions we had the last 2 days was that this requires a culture change in many organizations. You need to trust your employees, the executives need to show that this is important, lead by example, and you have to then basically open up. Not necessarily like many organizations have been doing, lock down everything unless there's a reason opening it up. Instead, turn it completely around and say everything should be open unless there's a reason to close things down. So keep this in mind when we talk about the first one. Make everything mobile. And that's an interesting one. We talked an awful lot about that the last few days, almost too much mobile. Some nice is like mobile, mobile, mobile almost. This screenshot, by the way, is from Daytona 500 a few weeks ago, where there was a big accident, and all race had to stop. And one of the drivers, Keselowski, actually then sitting in his car, oh, I have my iPhone on me. Took a picture, started tweeting and sharing what he was thinking and what was happening. And other people engaged in the conversation. I remember sitting there watching this on Comcast, I think it was Fox that was sending it, and I actually stopped paying attention. I started using Twitter as the main way of keeping in touch with it. And you could argue that this is just, David Pogue said this morning, we just seen the beginning of what's happening out there. And perhaps a couple of data points that my colleagues might have shared earlier this few days. There's actually estimated now that if you look at cell phones, let's take an example. There's estimated that 4.2 billion people have a toothbrush, while 5.1 billion people now have a cell phone. and you just think about it, wow. And the shipment of computers and tablets have surpassed the shipment of computers. So things are changing, and that's why mobile has been a big topic. But mobile, the new generations growing up using mobile have perhaps also different ways of using it than what we're used to. Some good and bad data points. A website, Chacha, interviewed 1,500 teens. And if teenagers were forced to pick one device, 61% would take the phone, 18% would say the computer. Computer is not as important as the phone, according to them. And 68% of the teens said their favorite way to communicate was text message, versus only 10% sent phone calls. So you're not talking to your teenagers anymore, you're going to text them. Perhaps some bad research that was done in the UK, not bad research, but strange or scary implications. In the UK, they found that 49% of teenagers said it was okay sending text messages while eating. And additional, or let's say 10% of them said it was okay sending text messages while having sex. I'm not sure this is going the right direction. So what I want to summarize here is perhaps some of the things that John talked about in his opening keynote when we talked about Cisco, and referring to Cisco's research, that 45% of young professionals will accept a job that are lower paying if it's just provide better flexibility. And another data point I mentioned was that 30% of young professionals feel that the ability to work remotely with a flexible schedule is a right to them, not a privilege. And think about that moving forward, that when you look at solutions here, you have to basically make them location independent, that it doesn't have to be in a physical location to do the job. And you could argue, some organizations have already seen this. I know IBM has been one of the sponsors. You know the joke about IBM, do you? What does the letter IBM stand for? It used to be IBM. It used to stand for I'm being moved, because you have no really clue who you'll be reporting to or what happens in this organization. Now the joke is that IBM stands for I'm by myself. And it has to do with 40% or so of the workforce doesn't really belong to an office. And the aim is similar. We usually try to get together in the office 1 day per week. The rest of the time, John is usually at Starbucks and other places. And that's how we do, and it's actually being more effective, more productive staff for many of them. Okay, digitalized processes. Getting rid of paper has been a challenge for us for years, and many of you still have a lot of paper in organizations. And airline industry, just as an example, it seems like even as a celebrity, you can be kicked out of a plane for not turning your cell phone off. But at the same time, the pilots are sitting in their cockpit with iPads and other tablets, using that for charge and other type of equipment. Consumer IT is taken into the cockpit, but not as passengers yet. And this is how the aviation charts used to look like. This is how they look like now. But looking at this, you have to remember that you can't really move to the next step in evolution until you get rid of paper from your processes. You have to and therefore go after those paper processes, especially if customers are engaged, and see is there a way you can do that. Because the big data we talked about, the social, the mobile, paper is like a level you have to work on before you can get to that level and take it, leverage some of these other technologies out there. And an example just to make you think. There's some researchers coming out from AIM. We found that 67% of organizations consider mobile technology to be important or extremely important for improving business processes. When I moved from Norway around 2002, 2003, that year I filled in my tax return with my cell phone. And why not? Because if everything is electronic, instead of sending it to me, they send it to the actually IRS, Norwegian IRS. They then add this in algorithms and figure out what I should pay in tax, check that with what my employer has said I paid, and then they send the form to me, and that form is now electronically. And the form, if that looks okay, I can take my phone, send a text message to them on the number on the form, electronic form, and get a text message back, and that's the receipt. They're proving it. That's the work, and actually when you take it that level, then you can take one step further, that actually to say no tax returns necessary anymore. We'll let you know what we calculated. If there's something wrong, let us know. If not, you're okay. And you can, all these things often requires you to take one step at a time, and paper is something you need to get rid of. Okay, social, number 4, make the business social. I have to say that most of us, I like Facebook. It took me a while to like it, same with Twitter. Actually, me and John in AIM was, I think, one of the first users of Facebook. And it looked a little bit sad in the beginning because we each had one friend, each other. And I think John's daughter also had a problem with her father being on Facebook. But it has changed, and I see most of my friends now are business related, and I see the lines blur between what's business and what's personal life. Some organizations have been slow in adopting this. This is last month. I went to YouTube and I searched for Comcast. And the hit number 1 you get on YouTube is a Comcast technician sleeping on my couch. So this was actually then a customer needed help to install a Comcast. A service technician came out, couldn't fix it, had to call into headquarters to get help. Was so long on hold to his own company, he fell asleep on the customer's couch. And the customer takes up his cell phone. Of course, they're everywhere, unless you're an AT&T customer. Sorry. Takes up his phone and videotapes the guy and then publishes that to YouTube. And I think it has 1.6 million hits or so. And you could argue, therefore, that what should Comcast do? They need to engage with the conversations. And some organizations like Best Buy, I feel now sometimes I get better service going into a Best Buy store on Twitter sometimes than I actually get from staff that are there. But there's still the problem of having the people you talk to, they actually know what I'm looking for, the context and other things I've been doing before it came to that, as some people, my colleagues were talking about earlier on. So a way to summarize some of these trends, because the more we use things as consumers, the more it starts bleeding into the enterprise. And I think Tony Sinjail summarized this quite well by saying, why is it that I know more about what my high school girlfriend had for dinner than what's going on in my organization? I think that's a nice way of summarizing it. And when we ask our members, I expect to use the same type of networking tools with my business colleagues as I do with my friends and colleagues, we see more and more people saying, yes, absolutely. And think about this that way, because if you think you have a choice, no, you don't really have a choice. This is a slide that John Newton made me aware of, and it's actually on the x-axis birth over years, and the y-axis birth in thousands. And you see there's a generation gap. There's a generation change happening. Ray Wang was talking about this a little bit. Because the people you look at, then, the email generation, to perhaps call it something, there is going to be a change here. And the new people that now live inside Facebook is going to expect that also moving forward. But still, 40% or so of organizations block people from accessing social media. And if you want to fight that internally, go and download a report from the National Defense University called Social Software and National Security and Net Assessment. And they basically analyze this from a security point of view and say outcome being benefits outweigh the risk. We should be doing this in the public sector, in the government. And that's also changed a lot of policies in federal government. And if you need a business case for doing these things, download the report that we published with Andrew McAfee that basically talked about enterprise questions and answers, open innovation, but also collaboration between marketing and sales. Those are 3 nice use cases with good example in these free reports available from aim.org/research. Okay, so number 5, use automation to ensure information governance. Because we have to automate things, but it's not only automate, it's ensuring that people buy into what we're doing. This is an example from Facebook with a lady basically complaining about her boss being not understanding her that well on Facebook, and forgetting in a rant that she just befriended her boss on Facebook that then reads her updates and fires her via Facebook. So you could argue that it's not only about having people part of, how to say, being engaged with staff, that staff are engaged with each other, and that you have a movement going, but it's also that staff understand what's the right thing, what's the wrong thing to do. Zappos, I think, has a more than $1 billion in turnover. Their policy for Twitter can fit in a tweet. And you cannot think about this because they have to be simple and effective, but the most important is the culture, of course, that people understand and you trust your staff then to do the right thing. And the one thing I want to put focus on here, and that is records management. I changed some of the labeling here to protect the vendor. But this is how a best practice records management solution used to look like. If you've been involved in web content management, some of the design criteria or guidance for web content management is when a person comes to a website, rule number 1, don't make them read and don't make them think. It should be intuitive. What you should click on, how the structure is to be able to find your stuff. Don't make me think, don't make me read. In records management, what have we been teaching our staff the last few years if we've been deploying this type of solution? Please read everything and please think very carefully what to do so you can drag the file down there. And then you think about, am I going to do that every time? Only if I'm highly motivated, and I'm not that motivated to do these type of things. So that's why, how can we automate this to simplify it and then also therefore reducing the risk of the organization? Okay, number 6, mine big data, or we should perhaps call it big content. Santa Cruz, I think it was, yeah, Santa Cruz Police Department. Their challenge has been that the number of calls has gone up by 20% the last years, and the number of staff officers has gone down by 20%. So how do you serve more with less resources? You start predicting. So by using big data, this case though mostly structured information, to predict where will crime be. So you basically hear this example from New York Times. They had police officers going to a region they expected there was a high probability that crime will happen. So they were there and can either stop it or see it or take action when it happened. And Ray Wang had a lovely example of the, if you got it this morning, about alarm bell. Alarm bell with big data connectivity, cool. It means that if there's a traffic jam, wake me up 15 minutes earlier on, or whatever is necessary. If my meeting is cancelled, let me sleep additional half an hour, whatever is the time. All happens while we're sleeping. Have the information come to me, instead of Mohammed going to the mountain. And of course, the value of this is for healthcare. It could be also linked to social media, because you know in healthcare, insurances, how many alcohol units do you drink per week? 1 or 2. Other things like that, do you smoke? Never touch. These type of things, while social media might tell something else. So there's a lot of also unstructured information from doctors and other things that help you identify things, and you can learn from things real time, as we talked about over the conference. Insurance companies, investigations, HR, lots of benefits, or to win the Jeopardy if you want to. Big data has many use cases. And looking at big data, most of it is unstructured. And this was a chart that basically was showing many organizations feel they have control of the structured stuff, but not the unstructured stuff. So, and with new tools, especially cloud-based solution using open data, how can we leverage this? And how can we help the business more being analytical and make decisions based on data instead of gut feeling? That will vary depending on what you eat for breakfast. Okay, commit to the cloud, 7 of the 8. And thank you to Lubor for this picture. By the way, anybody remember an application called WordPerfect? I like that application, as long as you have this paper bar around your F buttons, so you remember what was shift, print, or storage, or whatever it might be. What happened to them? Because in a few years, they were just like gone. The platform changed, didn't it? It changed from DOS to Windows. And in some way, it seems like WordPerfect executives didn't pay attention enough and said, now we're market leader, this is fine, but the customer changed the platform. And you could argue there's lots of examples of this. You have bookstores, of course, being influenced by Amazon. You have Blockbuster being influenced by Netflix, isn't it? Or you have American Airlines being influenced by GoToMeeting, or whatever it might be. So things are changing. And we have to then say, if this is a platform change for us, that can dramatically change it, especially since business executives are basically loving this, because it helps them deploy quicker things, and it also helps them might reduce cost, and often does reduce cost over ownership. And I think many of us underestimate what this means for us. And think of it this way. Many business executives adopt the cloud even with involving the IT department. Especially in marketing, we've seen that trend. Why won't that spread to other departments? What does the IT need to do? It needs to be an enabler instead of somebody stopping this unless absolutely necessary. But it's also that me as a user, I'm used to these apps, not on this one, but this one, apps costing me $1 or is free, and then my IT department asks for $100,000 to implement something that looks worse, and they spend 3 months doing it. So we have to say, how can the business change here? How can the IT department change here? And how can we better communicate to business and engage with the business, but also help to enable the business? And that's why I think Ray Wang's example earlier on was excellent of how we all should shake hands and hug each other necessarily, but at least try to hear what are the balancing we need to do here. But I think this with the shark example in the beginning, this cloud, I don't think it's I think it's mostly a matter of time for most of us when we will be in the cloud. At AIM internally, we will be in the cloud by end of this year, everything. And I say, because not everything will be software as a service and all that stuff, but it will be either a data center. We won't have an in-house data center anymore. But again, this is also a cost, performance, security, and other factors that influence you. Okay. My Chief Information Officer, Lawrence Hart, brilliant guy, came over this customer a year or two ago that basically says it's time for change, and this was the requirement for any new solution. And I thought it was worthwhile sharing it before addressing the last one. And the last one is because the goal was then, are there things we can learn from consumer application that help me meet our business requirement that only require a browser, open standards as much as possible, as Cheryl was talking about, is bring your own device, bring your own computer model with the web service capabilities, support mobile, and it's cloud ready. You might not be always able to do this, but it's a nice goal to have. And this is available as part of the presentation you can get from the app. So, number 8, and this is summarizing a lot what we've been talking about in AIM for the last few months. We started seeing Gartner, some large organizations, now they're saying all these trends happening, all these things happening at the same time, requires new resources to help us change and improve things. And Gartner published actually last year a Chief Information Officer alert, you need information professionals. You need you to help us out. And other analysts, research, document the same thing. So we asked, a little bit over a year ago, around 70% of our we asked several of our members a number of questions. One of the questions is, do you need a certification here or a body of knowledge that what do you then need to do to tackle this? So we started the development of that. It's impossible to read probably the small text, but that's what my colleagues out there, Tedra White and Jesse Wilkins, will be working on. And I have to say, check this out, because this certification, I think it's important not only to ensure that I have this broad knowledge that's necessary covering all these trends, but it's also that I can document this to business to show the value. And we tested this with some business executives that said, yes, this makes sense, and some industry executives that says, this is the right direction we need to go. It's going to be a long journey, but this is the direction we're going to go, and it helps us being prepared for the changes in the industry. That's the time I had, I think. I'm going to end with this, one of my favorite pictures. If there's any question, I think, shoot me an email, send me a tweet, and I'll respond to that over the next few days. It's a picture, actually, I think, commercial for bread, and I hope that this is not how you feel for today. But I know there's been a lot of content, but there's one last presentation to go, and that's my boss, John Mancini. So thank you for your time, John.